Allow me to begin with the assertion that indigenous rights as a discourse, no, as a field of or program of action is an inherently subversive discourse. No? Everything that we think of as the state or as elements of the state, people, territory, government, sovereignty, each of these elements are put into question by the aspirations of indigenous peoples or by the very presence or existence of indigenous peoples. And when I say this, I mean to include, to refer to not just the Teduray, Lambangian, or indigenous peoples or Lumad groups inside ARM, but as well to the Maguindanao, Tausug, Maranao, who are, from my perspective, also indigenous peoples. So a Maguindanao might say, why should I respect national laws? Because I have my own. I follow Sharia. I have my own indigenous legal system. No? So there is a understandable, appreciable interest in asserting local ways, local practices, local ideas, local systems of life, as opposed to that of the state, which is at the core of what we call self-determination. It is this assertion of what is ours and the right to select how your life is to be lived, how your lives have to be governed. Unfortunately, the state historically tends to react negatively towards assertions of self-determination. This is what Kleisters calls the state's dread of difference. Anything that is not approved by the state, anything that is alien, different from what is approved by law, is subject to suspicion, or even of violence. And historically, there was one anthropologist who said there have been more indigenous peoples who have been killed over issues of sovereignty, over issues of relations between their people and states than over all wars combined. It's a bold assertion. I do not know if it is truly accurate, but it underscores the fact that there is violence implicit or enacted between states and indigenous peoples. And this is what I'm referring to now as the vertical dimension of peace here in Mindanao and elsewhere. And that is precisely where we are now with the peace process. The vertical relations between Moro peoples, Maguindanao, Maranao, Tausug, etc., are being resolved through this vertical process of negotiation between the MILF in particular and the government of the Philippines. And then you have the transition from what was previously the ARMM to that of the Bangsamoro political entity. Now, by comparison, the Lumad have not addressed this question of verticality through the discourse of sovereignty. Rather, they have addressed it through a discourse of territory, property, space. Basically, the idea of ancestral domains or ancestral land or ancestral territory. Lupang ninuno, as those of you who have been activists since the 80s will have known the concept. This has had a long history as well here in the Philippines, and in a sense, it parallels the struggle of the Moro peoples for sovereignty. And that is the forum, that was the arena where we formulated such adages as land is life, where the centrality of land as an issue, as a political issue, is brought front and center in the struggle of indigenous peoples for recognition from the state in addressing this vertical relationship with the state. Which is why, say what you will about the IPRA and its shortcomings. There are inherent shortcomings to the IPRA. There are implementational problems with the IPRA. But the IPRA still represents a significant historical step in the development of the struggle. It is, for the first time, a recognition by the state that, yes, indigenous peoples do have legal rights within the national legal system. There is no way to understate how revolutionary that about face represents within the national legal system. So the tragedy for the indigenous peoples in ARM, unfortunately, is that this landmark legislation is unavailable, is made unavailable to them. No, they have not been afforded access to the IPRA. In particular, it was because of the imposition of the ARMM structure. So that in terms of the verticality, instead of the Teduray being able to access the state directly through the mechanisms of the IPRA, the ARM interceded. No? The ARM sort of superimposed itself in between the indigenous peoples as a group and the state and the Philippine national state on the other. In a sense, there is an impingement of the solution for the vertical relations between Moro peoples and the state upon the vertical relations for the Teduray and the national state. No? Sort of in addressing the problems between the state and the Maguindanao or Moro peoples, there was an extension, an impingement, I call it, of that solution, that vertical solution, upon that of the Teduray. Now, at this point, allow me to introduce a certain concept in anthropology called multiple legal pluralism. And it is this notion that in any society, in any social context, there are multiple legal systems in operation, no? And that we invoke these legal systems conditionally or contextually. So for example, here in the university, if I am sitting in a classroom presiding over a course, no? And I see a student throwing a piece of paper onto the floor, I can tell him not to do that. No? In that case, I am invoking not the national legal system, because there is no national legal system, there is no national law on littering, no? But the university rules, no? Which allow for authority of the faculty over students, and secondly, regulations over maintenance of order, maintenance of cleanliness within the campus. If, however, two of my students stab each other to death, no? I will not bring those students to my department head. I will not bring him to the dean. I will not bring him to the university president. No? In that case, the relevant, as it were, the relevant legal system would be that of the national state. No? So we operate in that kind of cultural context. Now, for Moro groups, this kind of multiplexity, no, this kind of plurality of legal systems can be found in the various ways they order social and property relations among themselves. You have, on one hand, family, or what we may call clan, quote-unquote, systems, no? Or indigenous Maguindanao or Maranao systems. You have, on the other hand, Sharia law. Then now you have the ARM as a system of law or governance. And then finally, you have the national legal state. At least, there are at least 4 legal systems at play. No? Now, for the state, as I said, the historical tendency of the state has been to resist that kind of plurality and to insist upon its own authority or power. However, in this case, in the case of the Maguindanao, the Moro peoples, no, they have accepted this situation that they need to recognize the Maguindanao rules, and yun na nga, they're trying to resolve it, these vertical relations between themselves through negotiation. The process entails the easing out of the state, no? So that as Sharia law is recognized, as local Maguindanao or Maranao practices are recognized, the state eases off, no? And asserts itself elsewhere. And that is the essence of the power sharing agreement. No? There are certain issues, there are certain matters that are being reserved exclusively for the Bangsamoro authority. Others will be for the state, and others are co-held, no? Shared between the two political entities. Now, that brings us to another dimension of this whole peace process, and that is the horizontal. No? There is no denying that there are certain tensions between indigenous groups, Teduray, for example, and Maguindanao and other Moro groups in the area. I am not sure how intense, no, or how widespread that conflict or tension is, but it is there. There is no point in denying that it is a factor in local politics, regional politics, and in national politics. There are those tensions between Lumad and Moro individuals and communities. In particular, at least in the South UP case, no, there was this tension between Teduray and Maguindanao over land. No? This very strategic, very contentious, very important, symbolically, culturally, and economically important resource. No? And for them, at least for the Teduray that we talked to, peace was not about what was being discussed in Malaysia or in Manila. Peace was about resolving land conflicts, which was why they had Blay Eketab in South UP. It's an effort to organize leaders of the Maguindanao and of the Teduray into a joint peace resolving or peace addressing body. No? So the recognition there was that conflict in the area was not about sovereignty. It was not about the relative rights of ethnic groups vis-a-vis the national state. It was about land conflicts. No? It was the horizontal that was important for them. Peace, in other words, was all about settling land conflicts. No? The problem now for the Teduray in particular is that here you have two peoples who have a history of conflict over land. No? And then suddenly, because of the peace negotiations, one party to that tense relationship, that tense dynamic, has been empowered. Because under the framework agreement and under the power sharing agreement, the Bangsamoro have been privileged with control over issues over ancestral domains, natural resources, land registration, and even, most ironically, the protection of indigenous people's rights. It is as if, no, again, to reiterate my previous point, that the Teduray have, in a sense, been subsumed under the authority of the Bangsamoro in the course of resolving the problem between the Bangsamoro and the national state. Some of you might be wondering why I have been privileging the Teduray in particular, but there is no particular reason why the experience of the Teduray is to be can and should be limited to them. In other words, their problems can very well be the problems of Ilonggo settlers in the area. No? Or now that the investors are moving around in the area, what are the relations now between more indigenous groups, Lumad groups, Moro groups, local Ilonggo settlers, Ilocano settlers, and investors who are now beginning to enter the area? And finally, there is the question of horizontal relations among and within Moro groups. You have feuds, you have competitions over power, you have competitions over resources, even within the ranks of the Moro. All of these are aspects of the peace process, aspects of peace. Yet, the focus has totally been on the questions of sovereignty and not on the horizontal relations between peoples, between sectors, within the projected autonomous area. Now, what then is to be done? In a very significant sense, what the advocates of the Bangsamoro political entity are faced with is the task of state building. No? In other words, they're trying to come up with a political entity which is sub-state, but has many of the characteristics of a state. It has to have right now they're defining people, they're defining territory, they're defining sovereignty, and they are defining the form of government. No? So the basic elements of a state are being formulated within the framework no, of the peace negotiations. So it is, in a sense, in a very real sense, a state-building project. No? The problem there is that fortunately or unfortunately, they have chosen to call this entire exercise and their project with the term Bangsamoro or Moro, no? And that is unfortunately a very loaded term, a very frayed term, no? It has too many associations, negative and positive, for many people. For the Philippines, no, we have our own foundational myth. Myth not in the sense of a fantasy or a superstition, but myth in the sense of a unifying symbol, a unifying discourse. No? For the Philippines, it is this idea that because of our anti-colonial struggle, against Spain and against the United States, the Philippine Republic was born. Now, this is a discourse that a lot of people can buy into. Diba? The indigenous people can buy into it because they're part of the resistance. The Moro peoples can buy into that discourse because they can be presented as a part of the anti-colonial struggles over 400 years. Diba? They were unconquered by Spain. Even the left, the communists can buy into this foundational myth because they can portray their struggle as an extension of that of Andres Bonifacio. No? So it's a very plastic, very flexible discourse. What people in the Bangsamoro political entity need is something like this, a discourse, a set of symbols, a trope that is inclusive, that people can buy into, can commit to. We've considered the importance of the land question, no? Because as I said, the land question goes into the horizontal relations among peoples within the projected political entity. So I think, and this is something that is missing both from the framework agreement and in the annexes, no? There needs to be greater clarification, no, on what the MILF and the Bangsamoro peoples intend for addressing the question of land and natural resource rights inside the projected autonomous region. We need clarification. So right now, I can imagine how profound the anxiety might be for Manobo, Teduray, who are inside the arm area, precisely because you have a history of tensions between their people and some sectors of the Bangsamoro people, and the fact that control over land and natural resources has been, in a sense, awarded to that other party. Having recognized that there are tensions on the horizontal level, no? Why not have confidence-building measures between MILF or the Bangsamoro on one hand and indigenous groups on the other? When the state and the MILF began these talks, there were confidence-building measures in recognition of the fact that there are tensions between these two political entities. Why not at the horizontal level? Why cannot there be similar confidence-building measures between the MILF and the proponents of the Bangsamoro political entity and indigenous groups inside the who are who are confronted with the idea of being included within the Bangsamoro political entity, no? And yun, again, the clarification of the intent, the legal program, the natural resource program of the MILF and the Bangsamoro peoples would go a long way in terms of building this confidence between the two. And once that confidence is built, you have a greater certainty that the political entity itself will find approval during the ratification process. Thank you for your patience, and I look forward to a fruitful discussion. Thank you.